So this is going to be all about those PADI exam questions that relate to breathing. Things like dead airspace, overexertion, exchange of gases, and also questions that relate to freediving. Things like the mammalian diving reflex, the deep stomach breathing, and shallow water blackout. So whilst it's important for you to know the answers to questions like these for your exam, it's also important for you to know how to teach these subjects. I mean, you're going to be a PADI instructor soon. So let's imagine that you'll be teaching all of this on a Dive Master course in the very near future. It's not a difficult subject to teach, providing you get your class up to speed with the basics first. It's a good idea for you to prepare them at the start of the lesson by getting them to remember just how it feels when they get a build-up of carbon dioxide in their lungs. You know that feeling of air starvation, slight panic, confusion, etc.? Actually, it's a really good idea to teach this lesson to them just before they need to do the equipment exchange stress test, because if they remember this lesson, it's going to help them keep relaxed. Oh, and if you're heading for your IDC soon, it's also a good idea for you to keep this lesson in mind while you're doing your skill circuits. It will certainly help you keep relaxed, especially during those times when your regulator's going to be behind your shoulder or someone else is turning your air off in those air depletion exercises. So, getting back to you teaching your Dive Master course. As I said, to get your team prepared, maybe you can ask the group just to stop breathing, just for a short moment. But before you do, maybe you could just ask them how they think they're going to feel. Maybe some of them will say that they expect that they'll be starved of oxygen and desperate to breathe in. But that's not going to happen, is it? That won't happen, because if you ask them just to stop breathing, I mean mid-breath, in other words, no big deep breath in, just stop. And then after a short while, they'll begin to feel that build-up in their lungs. And far from feeling starved of oxygen, they'll all feel the need to breathe out. And virtually everyone in your class will exhale forcefully after a short while. It's that urge to get rid of carbon dioxide that's the real priority. And associated with that is that feeling of breathlessness, panic, general discomfort. So breathing is primarily about two gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide. But for us scuba diving instructors in this context, one of these gases is far more important than the other one, and we're about to find out which one that is. So once your dive masters are thinking about how uncomfortable carbon dioxide can feel, it's not difficult for them to realise that it takes a fairly long out-breath to get rid of it. If they were to give a very short out-breath, the carbon dioxide wouldn't get very far. They'd breathe it back in, add more carbon dioxide, and that will worsen any symptoms. So this, of course, is the concept of dead airspace. We need to breathe out long enough for the air to travel from the alveoli all the way through our pipes to the outside world. The same on the in-breath. We need to breathe deep enough to get the fresh oxygen from the outside air right the way through all of the pathways and into our bloodstream, into the alveoli. And imagine if we were breathing through a snorkel. The air would then have to travel even further, and all of these passageways added together is called the dead airspace. PADI dead airspace questions are nearly always focused on the need to breathe slowly and deeply to reduce the effect of dead airspace. Now, experienced instructors, they're always making sure that their students at all levels are breathing correctly. And once you become an instructor, if you get a nervous diver on any course who's breathing shallow and fast, they'll soon add to their problems as their carbon dioxide levels start building up. And that soon provides you with a very real problem on top of their imagined problem. And while we're on this subject, I still find it amusing that the advice for people who are panicking for whatever reason underwater is to breathe slowly and deeply. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been really nervous while underwater, but if you're really scared about something real or imaginary, the last thing that you'll be able to do is control your breathing. But to be honest, now we know what our real enemy is, the solution is simply to blow out, blow away the carbon dioxide. The in-breath will look after itself, and after a while, you'll soon calm down. It's only then that you can retain control over your breathing. We can now move on with confidence with our next subject, which is overexertion. It's very much like everything that we've already spoken about here. In fact, anything that can make our breathing shallow and fast will cause problems with carbon dioxide. And so, in an exam, the correct answer will always be the answer that suggests that you rest, relax, regain control, breathe slow, deep, that sort of stuff. Oh, actually, now we understand a little bit more about carbon dioxide, we can look a little bit closer at PADI's most important rule of scuba diving. Breathe continuously and never hold your breath. Many instructors think that this is only to do with preventing lung overexpansion injury, and some instructors even think that it's not applicable if people are kneeling on the floor of a pool. But they're wrong. They're very wrong, because blowing out those small bubbles when the regulator isn't in the mouth is a very sensible thing to do, because it's continuously removing any carbon dioxide that's accumulating in the lungs. It's helping to prevent the student from that uncomfortable feeling of a carbon dioxide build-up. Well, we've looked at all of the advantages of breathing, and now what we're going to do is look at some PADI questions that you're going to find regarding freediving. In other words, where we're not breathing, we're holding our breath underwater. So freediving has become so popular recently, and it's a great sport. I'm guessing that many of you are already getting involved with it. And as far as PADI questions are concerned, they're just a couple of areas to deal with. Now, the first two subjects are both to do with calming divers before a breath hold dive. The mammalian diving reflex and the diaphragmatic breathing. I think that both of these are of particular interest because as an instructor in the real world, I've been using both of these methods to calm my open water students for years. The mammalian diving reflex applies to all mammals. It's where cold water around the face slows down the heart rate and helps to relax the body. Of course, it works better on some mammals than on others, but when you're next teaching your open water course, especially in chilly water, it's a really good idea for you to get your divers to put their face in the water at the surface, lift in their mask for a few seconds, get their faces wet. It definitely relaxes people and has the added advantage of lessening that shock of mask clearing later on in the dive. But back to freediving. Freedivers spend quite a while on the surface preparing for their dives. They put their face in the water to make use of that mammalian diving reflex. They relax and then they breathe deeply and slowly using deep stomach techniques that allow the diaphragm to move up and down with each breath. This calms the breathing, calms the body and calms the mind. The idea is to get as relaxed as possible while at the same time avoiding hyperventilation. Now, continuing with freediving, there's nearly always a PADI question about shallow water blackout. And this is where if a freediver is going to pass out, it's often near the end of their dive when they're ascending and getting close to the surface. And the reason is that while the freediver is still at depth, and the surrounding pressure is high, any oxygen left in the body is a higher partial pressure, keeping the diver conscious. But as the diver ascends, the surrounding pressure reduces, lowering that partial pressure continually. So by the time they're reaching the surface, the partial pressure of any remaining oxygen is extremely low, and sometimes this leads to unconsciousness. And that's why it's called shallow water blackout, because the partial pressure of oxygen is so low at shallow depths. Anyhow, there's not much left in this section, but since we've been talking about oxygen, And this is a little bit out of context, but PADI often ask a question about the dangers of breathing pure oxygen at depth. And the danger will of course be oxygen toxicity. So that's it. So as usual, just to make sure that you're up to speed with all of this stuff, I've added some typical PADI exam type questions in the next lesson. So good luck with those, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you again in the next video. See you then.